Thanks,
former First Lady Michelle Obama, when she tweeted, "What truly makes our country great is its diversity. I've seen that beauty in so many ways over the years. Whether we are born here or seek refuge here, there's a place for us all. We must remember it's not my America or your America, it's our America." Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna has called for the Obamas to come out and give speeches to rebut President Trump. We'll see if they decide to do that.
So let's talk about all of that with a superstar panel that's with me today here in New York. Astrid Herndon is a political reporter for the New York Times. Tara Dowdell is a political and business strategist, also a contestant, by the way, on season 3 of The Apprentice. And legendary journalist Dan Rather is here as well, former anchor of the CBS TV News, now a host at Access TV and Sirius XM. Thank you all for joining me. Let's process what this week has been like, a painful week, I think, for many Americans. The decision to call Trump's tweets racist. The New York Times, other news outlets had to make these choices. How did you view these choices? How were they made?
I think media is going through an unprecedented time where the president's words are so kind of vocally stoking that kind of white identity and white grievance politics. It's forcing new choices on media outlets. I think newspapers want to show, our instinct is to show and not tell, right? The instinct is to bring out a kind of evidence-based showing of the president's history with race, putting it in context, as you talked about. But there is still a kind of uncomfort with using those labels that some folks think will turn other people off. I mean, I think, as someone who covers race and politics often, that the most important question that sometimes media loses sight of is just the question of truth. I mean, there is a point that some make about whether it turns off readers or what's going to be the reaction. I think the question we should be asking, which is back to our kind of journalistic fundamentals, is, was it racist? Was it not racist? And those are the lens in which media has to come to grips with, becoming comfortable with using those type of phrases when they're warranted.
And there are multiple words to use depending on what's going on. Bigoted and xenophobic.
Exactly.
We should get specific and explain why we're getting specific. Tara, what's your view of this? Because one of the standards editors at NPR said this week, we should not be in the business of moral labeling. That's the view from NPR, but a lot of news outlets have been saying the president's attack was racist. Where do you come down?
With respect to, I'm on the other side. I'm on the PR side of this. And I can tell you, with respect to this issue, this ongoing issue that we seem to be grappling with, is journalism to me, and what it has been historically in historic context, is it's always been about exposing wrongdoing, exposing the corruption of both government as well as corporations. Anyone can be a stenographer. The job of a journalist is not to be a stenographer. And the Trump administration has actually leveraged the fact that journalism is often looking to just put out there what he said.
Just quote him.
Just quote him. And so he uses that to his advantage to mislead the public. So anyone can be a stenographer. The role of the journalist should be watchdogs, should be about exposing things. Historically, Pentagon Papers in 1971, journalism at its best. 1972, the Watergate break-in, journalism at its best. 1992, exposing sexual misconduct in Congress. That is what our journalism industry has done at its best. And that is the legacy and the history of journalism in this country. So I don't see why we would deviate from that now.
Right. Don't just quote it, put it in context. And that applies to the rallies as well. Dan, the Wednesday night rally where we see the audience chanting, "Send her back." Trump did one of those things where he said, "Don't believe your own eyes, don't believe your own ears." He said that he interrupted right away and moved on. Well, not interrupted. He said he moved on right away. Obviously, 13 seconds was an eternity at that rally. Why do you think he gets away with telling his fans, don't believe what you saw on that videotape, just believe what I'm saying now? Don't believe your lying eyes.
Partly because he's a great showman. Let's face it, he's very good on television. He's a powerful figure on television. But the other thing I think we have to keep in mind, and this goes back to a bit of the previous conversation, look, racism is as racism does. And this argument among journalists about whether we should say that racism is racism, I'm sorry, doesn't get very far. When it's racism, it needs to be called racism. But I do point out that the president, it isn't enough just to call out his racist language. When he does things like he lies repeatedly about the 4 young women congressmen, he's lied repeatedly. He's taken their words out of context, which is pretty much a lie in and of itself. Now, the journalist's job, whether it's a rally or the president's tweet or the president standing shouting on the back lawn of the White House, is to put that in context. There's the dangerous trap of forgetting. Journalists tend to forget the long line of things that you outlined to start the program. It's very important to put these things into context, and frankly, what we journalists should be doing is every time the president tells a lie, for example, about these 4 congressmen, right away it needs to be pointed out that this is a lie, and to call it what it is, not just say, well, the president has said something here that's a little controversial.
Yeah, I hate the word controversial these days. I see it in banners and headlines all the time. Controversial can be a really good thing. In this case, it's a gross, sickening thing.
But you know, Brian, Americans pride themselves. We like straight talk. We like somebody who looks you in the eye, has a firm handshake, and tells you what they think. Don't try to cut it. So when it's racist, say that it's racist. When it's out of context, say that it's out of context. Repeat what he said and then go through the record. Because there is this what I call dangerous trap of forgetting the long record. And that applies not only to what he's done in race, but what he's done to undermine the institutions of the country, the checks and balances, what he said during the campaign that he hasn't done. This doesn't get nearly enough attention, in my opinion, that he promised he's going to take care of health care. He hasn't. He said he was going to start a big infrastructure. He hasn't. He said he was going to raise the minimum wage. He hasn't. So hold him to account not just for the things that he says, including the racist things he says, but to what he said during the campaign. That's been pretty much forgotten, and I do think it needs to be brought to the forefront by reporters.
Let's also briefly touch on where the president is getting these ideas from, why he's attacking these 4 progressive congresswomen. He's hearing a lot about them on Fox News. Look at the graphic that we produced here, showing mentions of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Fox, CNN, and MSNBC, basically from January up until this weekend. You can see that she's talked about on Fox a lot more than on CNN or MSNBC. And that is true as well for Ilhan Omar. So we decided to compare Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to a couple of the leading House Democrats who actually have a lot of power. We chose Jim Clyburn, for example, one of the leaders of Nancy Pelosi's House. And we can put you on screen the mentions of Clyburn compared to AOC and Omar. And you see he's barely in the news compared to these freshman congresswomen. Tara, is that a legitimate complaint that the press is focusing so much on the freshmen and not on the actual leaders of the House?
That is, of course, a legitimate complaint. This is about racial opportunism, and Trump is taking advantage of race divisions in this country, long existing fissures in this country, because he's been rewarded for doing so by his base. And so he's responding to that. And one of the things I want to point out, too, as someone who is in marketing and PR, is that so-called extemporaneous chant of "send her back" by the audience seems pretty suspicious, because typically that type of thing is organized. When you see chants in audiences, a lot of times it's either someone is stoking it from the, backstage or off stage, or there are people in the audience who have been sort of planted to do those things. So I think that people should actually look into that as well, because this all seems, I think Trump is far more calculating than people make him out to be. This is all a strategy. He won.
And the answer to that is let's hear from voters more. If that's possible, let's hear from the voters in the crowd more.
Right.
Let's find out what they were thinking. I would like to spend 10 times as much time hearing from voters as where we are now. And instead, wrapping up here, the question I started with, is the press up to the challenge? What do you recommend to newsrooms that are grappling with how to cover openly racist behavior from a U.S. president?
I think in the same way we think about other issues that are core to kind of politics right now, in the same way that we think about health care and other kind of quote-unquote kitchen table issues, newsrooms need to recognize that race and identity will be the central key point of this election, and that we as media need to empower and reporters to think about those issues in the same kind of fact-driven, clear-eyed, accountability-driven way that we think about other issues. And so that requires talking to voters. That requires talking to white voters and saying at those Trump rallies and saying, what do they think about this? When I talk to folks about white identity and what they're feeling right now, they will openly tell you kind of that they are worried about a replacement in this country. They're worried about the influx of minorities and immigrants. And that is things that we cannot shy away from, because that is not the side course of this election. It is the main entree.
It is. It's the main story. The fading away of white dominance is a massive story.
Yeah.
But sometimes the biggest stories are the hardest ones for us to tell, right? We're more comfortable covering a tweet than we are covering something that's affecting generations.
Yeah, and to point back, we have a long history of being kind of bad at this stuff, if we want to be kind of honest. I mean, when we think about the Civil Rights Movement, when we think about the Great Migration, when we think about newsrooms have historically struggled rising to the challenge of covering race in this country. This requires newsrooms thinking about the issue in a different way, and that's going to be what we're going to have to do going forward.
This is an opportunity for all of us. Let's take a quick break with the panel. More in just a moment. There's also some breaking news on the Mueller front. Jerry Nadler making a bold statement on Fox. We're going to share that with you. Plus, a new turn of the revolving door between Trump and Fox. American Carnage author Tim Alberta is here with analysis. But up next, The Atlantic's Adam Serwer. He says 5 words explain what happened at that rally. And he's up right after this break. Hey, welcome back to Reliable Sources. We've been talking about President Trump, his recent rally, the send her back chants. It's really been an embarrassing week for the United States. Imagine what viewers around the world are thinking when they see this. But the president's been at this for a while, and you may have heard a phrase, 5 words that try to sum up the Trump age. You may have heard this across television. The cruelty is the point.
It seems as though the Trump administration, cruelty is the point.
The cruelty is the point.
The cruelty is the point.
It seems like the cruelty is the point.
That phrase has spread throughout the media ecosystem, but it started right here with The Atlantic staff writer Adam Serwer. He wrote this piece on theatlantic.com, and Adam is with me now. I'm interested in how an idea spreads, in this case, the idea that the cruelty is the point. When did you first come up with this phrase? What did you mean, and how do you think it spread?
Well, I came up with it after watching the president go after Christine Blasey Ford in front of an entire crowd of people and just hold her up for ridicule and scorn. And I think that I just sort of realized that this was a fundamental part of the president's relationship with his supporters, this sort of community flaying of the president's enemies. And I think it's not unique to Trump supporters. I think it's a part of human nature. If you've ever been the kid who got made fun of in class and everybody laughed at you, it's an extension of that same feeling. It's just that this president, with his politics, has elevated that kind of behavior to a political virtue. And I think the reason that it's spread is it sort of concisely articulates something that everybody knew and understood, but struggled to say because it feels so strange for us to be watching something like this unfold today in our own time.
It's also so provocative, and some people perhaps don't want to believe that the cruelty is the point. What's it been like for you as a writer to see this phrase used by presidential candidates and anchors all across TV? What's that like?
It's a little weird, honestly. You know, I think I didn't expect when I wrote it that it would reach the sort of escape velocity that it has. But again, I just think, you know, the reason why it resonates is because it concisely explains something that everybody understands is true, including the president.
Let's look at your most recent piece of The Atlantic. It's titled, "What We Do as Americans Right Now Will Define Us Forever." What do you mean by that?
I think that the president, by embracing this classic racist attack of saying people need to go back to the countries where they came from, he's assailing in very directly in a way that he was already doing, but not quite as blatantly. He's assailing the foundations of multiracial democracy that have existed in the United States since 1965. Now, remember, before 1965, before the Voting Rights Act, before the Civil Rights Act, black people were not full participants in American democracy. This is a relatively recent experiment, and the president is assaulting it directly by implying that certain people, particularly people of color, are not real Americans in the way white Americans are. And that's an argument that has been with us since the beginning of the founding. And I think for some people it's shocking that we're still arguing about it in this way, but it is an existential question for American democracy, and one that we have been arguing over from the beginning of our existence.
And a lot of journalists watch this program. If you had 30 seconds to tell folks in newsrooms how you think this story, this huge story, should be covered in the weeks to come, what would you say?
I would say something that my friend Brian Beutler wrote the other day. I would say, bear witness faithfully.
Bear witness faithfully. You
Yes.
mean don't shy away from what's happening right in front of our eyes?
Tell the truth. That's it.
Should be easy. Adam, thank you very much. Great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, the Trump-Fox revolving door is still spinning. Hear about the newest hire at Fox Corps right after this.
The CNN Democratic presidential debates, July 30th and 31st on CNN.
Hey, until January, Raj Shah was Sarah Sanders' top deputy at the White House. He was a chief spokesman for the administration. And now he is joining Fox Corps. That's the parent company of Fox News. He's now a senior vice president at the network. At this point, the Fox-Trump relationship has been very well established. You can see some evidence of it here. But the new book, American Carnage, looks at how this began. And author Tim Alberta joins me now. Tim, congrats on the book launch. It's been a hot seller all week. You argue that the Tea Party, figures like Sarah Palin, broke some ground, loosened up the ground for Trump. How did that Fox relationship manifest?
Well, it's actually pretty interesting, Brian. When you think about the convergence of events around the Obama presidency, around the time he was elected in 08 and taking office in 09, we focus a lot on, the economic displacement and the cultural upheaval of this period. Obviously, the political polarization and all of that plays huge role in what we're seeing today. But I think another thing that's really important to think about is the explosion of social media, the continued advancement of Fox News and of the cable news ecosystem writ large, and how that played into the information or misinformation in some cases that voters were receiving. And obviously, the Tea Party wave and the ascent of Trump, much of that was intertwined with Fox News consuming an ever-growing share of the sort of 45-plus white conservative viewing demographic that had once been a reliable demographic for, the evening newscasts or certainly even for, daily newspapers. The decline in some of those more institutional mainstream media outlets certainly coincided as a corollary with the growth of Fox News and with the Republican Party as a whole moving farther and farther to the right.
And it seems like some veteran Republicans have complained to you in interviews for your book about the influence of Fox. Here's Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House, saying, politicians realize I don't have to work my way up the committee process. I don't have to pass a bunch of bills and prove my worth. I can just go on Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and I can be a hero on the Drudge Report.
Yeah, and Paul Ryan's not wrong, obviously. Paul Ryan actually at one point in our interview called out by name, unsolicited, Matt Gaetz, who's a freshman congressman from Florida who has, I think probably better than many other Republicans in the Trump era, sort of figured out how to exploit that ecosystem that we're living in now, that media political ecosystem. And Gaetz is somebody who, as a freshman lawmaker, discovered a way to get really close to Donald Trump, got on Air Force One a whole lot of times, got on Fox News a whole lot, despite saying some things that were, unsavory and untrue. And Gaetz is sort of this celebrity entertainer, a politician who Ryan talks about in the book as being a guy who, it doesn't matter anymore if you don't know what you're talking about, if you haven't worked your way up the committee process, if you don't know how to pass a law. None of that really matters anymore as long as you can get on Fox News or as long as you can get that media exposure.
Because of the warping influence of television. Now, President Trump tweeted out that maybe Ryan was paid by you, and that's why he said these honest things in the book, what Trump would say critical things in the book. Should I give up hope that the president's ever going to understand how the news media really works, that we would ever pay a guest?
Well, look, I'm still paying off my wife's student loans and my student loans, so if I was paying Paul Ryan for an interview, I would need a divorce attorney, first of all. Look, I have no idea what the president thinks. I sat down with the president for the book, and he knows that I didn't pay him for that interview, so I assume that he was just being tongue-in-cheek. I don't really want to say anything more about it.
Tim Alberta, thank you so much. The book is American Carnage.
Thanks, Brian.
Check it out. Quick break
Appreciate
here, and up next, the Robert Mueller literacy gap. Will the upcoming hearings make a difference? Plus, a brand new statement from the House Judiciary Chairman. That's next. With some breaking news, T-minus 3 days until Robert Mueller's testimony on Capitol Hill. And the House Judiciary Chairman, Gerald Nadler, says there is very substantial evidence the president is guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, he just said this on Fox News Sunday. We'll talk about how significant it is or is not, but here's the soundbite.
The report presents very substantial evidence that the president is guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors, and we have to present, or let Mueller present those facts to the American people, and then see where we go from there, because the administration must be held accountable, and no president can be above the law.
So that's what he's saying. But what does it mean? What's going to happen as a result on Wednesday at the hearings? Let's talk about it now. The panel is back here with me. Dan Rather, the Mueller hearings, we've been waiting for this for months. The report's been out for more than 3 months. You know, these print editions of the Mueller report, they've been all over the place. They've sold a couple 100,000 copies, but this is not, most Americans have not read this report.
True.
How important do you think the hearings will be? How many people will tune in?
Well, I have no idea predicting ratings. I learned a long time ago not to try to predict the ratings. However, it has the potential of being a tip-over moment. Everything depends on what Mueller is prepared to say and how well, particularly the Democratic members of the committee, handle the whole thing. It certainly has the potential to rivet the country. Doing the Watergate hearings, which everybody's probably tired of hearing about by this time back in the 70s.
You tell me.
No, but the power of television riveted public attention and made a big difference during the crimes committed by the Nixon administration, which eventually resulted in his resignation. But I come back to it, a lot of it's up to Mueller. How much is he willing to give? I mean, this again is his moment. Well, we'll see. I will say that the Democrats can't have it both ways. Here is the chairman of the committee, Congressman Adler, saying the president has committed high crimes and misdemeanors. So then the question is, well, what are you going to do about it?
Right.
He's part of a Democratic leadership that up to now has taken pretty much the tactic, strategy, if you want to call it that, of a wounded Trump is better than a martyred Trump. So they want to keep saying he's committed crimes, but so far they're not doing very much about it.
He's literally saying on Fox today, the president has broken the laws, quote, 6 ways from Sunday. It's like a police officer pointing at me saying, you're breaking the law, and then not doing anything, not arresting me. It doesn't make any sense to me as a consumer of news. Does it make any sense to you, Ashley, covering this world every day?
Well, I think Democrats are trying to have it both ways. I mean, we have seen kind of an increasing amount of voices. Congressman Adler's another one, kind of get closer and closer to that line of impeachment. But the most important person here is Nancy Pelosi, and she has not decided to show no indication of this front on moving. I think your point about a wounded president is clear. And so when we talk about news consumption here, both those things are very important. It's important for press to track the kind of way the Democratic caucus is trending, but we always have to come back to the person with the power here is the speaker, and she has shown no willingness to kind of move on that impeachment front, even as there's increasing calls from the base and on the 2020 side to do so. You can see this kind of split screen. I cover 2020, impeachment's all the rage there. The candidates are kind of united on that front, but when you go to the Hill, that appetite hasn't been as clear.
Tara, do you buy the idea that televised hearings makes all the difference? Again, this report's been out for months. Some people have bought the book, but most have not. There have been Broadway plays, there have been podcasts, there have been book clubs, there have been all these attempts, mostly by progressives, to get people interested in the report.
Right.
I don't see a lot of evidence that's worked.
I think that this will be more effective, and I will tell you why. It's not just about television. It's about what happens after things air on television, the amplification of it through social media, the amplification of it through news media coverage. We also have to remember one of the things that the Trump administration has done is every single time there's a mention of Mueller, they've come out aggressively, they've muddied the waters. Trump has done something, shiny, bright object to use to distract people from it. I think this will create a situation having Mueller testify himself. This is in his own words. Up until now, it's been other people's words.
Yeah, look
it's
at
been
these
the
actors
Trump
that are
administration's
doing it.
words.
There's these actors
this
doing it.
is
It doesn't
Mueller.
count. This is
and
Mueller.
I think people want to hear directly from Robert Mueller. So I do think it will help. Do I think Democrats have gone far enough? No, absolutely not. I think Democrats should go much farther, particularly given what we do know from the Mueller report.
Normally, after something like a Mueller hearing, we'd hear from the White House. There would be a press briefing, in that room where we used to have press briefings. But it's been 132 days since the last on-camera White House press briefing. There's no sign of them starting again this week, although I'd be happily surprised if there was a briefing. What do you make, Tara, of this White House strategy, which is to not have these briefings?
if you have something to hide, you don't go, you don't go public, right? So clearly, this White House has something to hide. That's kind of PR 101. I mean, from the perspective of political PR 101, you restrict access to information because you have something to hide. You restrict access to being held accountable. You restrict transparency. So that's a sign. If you have nothing to hide, you do a press briefing all the time. You
it's
make yourself available.
Joe Biden came out recently and said if he's elected, he will restore regular briefings. Politico's Michael Calderon asked all the other Democratic campaigns, and virtually every single campaign said the same thing. Two of them didn't reply. But basically, every Democratic candidate says, we will bring back the briefing. So that's significant. Dan, last word to you, 30 seconds. When we're all watching this hearing on Wednesday, what should we watch for? What's your advice as an anchorman?
Well, first of all, I think give as much time to it as you can, because it may take time to develop. Secondly, read body language, eye contact, quality of voice. The television, people get fixed on just the visual image. There's a speaker in the box, and how Mueller handles himself, how members of the committee handle themselves, all of that. But I guess my most advice is give it as much time as you can and concentrate on what's being said and put it in context of everything else you know about the Trump administration. And keep in mind all along, you know, in our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, part of it is one nation under God, indivisible. And keep in mind, when you're watching the hearings, do I think that the administration so far has tried to unite the country? Or do I think the administration has tried to divide the country, whatever the Congress decides in the criminality?
To our panel, thank you so much. Quick break here, and then we're going to be talking about some of the rhetoric you've probably heard if you've turned on Fox News lately. Rhetoric about socialism. I want to ask the editor of the country's biggest socialist magazine, what's true and false? That's coming up next. President Trump and his pro-Trump media allies want you to believe that all Democrats are socialists, and they want you to believe that socialism is destroying, or even the possibility is destroying, America. We took a look at how Fox News hosts have been talking about this subject. Here's just a few examples from this week.
Socialism is absolutely toxic.
All the Democrat candidates are for socialism or a variety of socialism.
There are no more moderates in today's extreme Democratic Party as socialism is completely and radicalism completely taken over.
Socialism is toxic.
Toxic. Okay, we get it. Well, let's widen out the lens, because in the United States, there is a socialist magazine. It's called Jacobin. It's been out for years. It's been growing in popularity. The editor and the founder is Bhaskar Sankara. His book is titled The Socialist Manifesto, and it came out earlier this year. Bhaskar, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So what is the parallelism between the rise of conversation about socialism in America and the rise of your magazine?
Well, we have been committed to articulating the kind of politics we think can actually reach a majority of Americans, a kind of politics that says that there are certain things in life that shouldn't be the result of accidents of birth. There are certain things in life that we all deserve just by virtue of being born. And obviously, we've grown a lot. We're at 50,000 subscribers. Before Trump started mentioning socialism, before Trump got elected, we were at 10, 15,000. Before Bernie Sanders, we were down in the doldrums.
So do you call that a Trump bump, or was that a Bernie Sanders bump with people wanting to subscribe to your magazine?
Well, I think during the campaign, Bernie Sanders articulated a set of ideas that were to the left of traditional establishment liberalism. And we needed that as a prerequisite. But it was actually Trump election that really exploded the political spectrum in the United States, because we saw that establishment liberalism was no longer capable of really galvanizing people. And I think as a result, we saw the rise of this dangerous right populism and what Trump represents.
The way that hosts on Fox talk about socialism is fascinating to me. Here's an example from economics writer Ben Stein.
All these ways of socialist thinking are ways to control the American people and to take away their freedom to choose, their freedom to do what they want to do with their lives. Socialism is about maintaining government control over people.
So control. How do you define socialism? How do you react to sound bites like that?
Well, I think socialism is actually about freedom. It's about freedom to be able to determine the destiny of our own lives. So when I think about my relationship with my health insurance company, I'm not thinking about my freedom to choose between different health insurance providers. I'm thinking about the premium that I have to pay every month. I'm thinking about the fact that if I lose my job, if I'm out of work, then I'll have to find a new provider or go uninsured. And if I'm uninsured, I might have to pay a fine at the end of the year. You know, this is the status quo. And I think that socialism in the United States, democratic socialism, really means that there are certain things in life where we don't actually want to be held hostage to the market. And in fact, healthcare, education, childcare, housing, these basic things need to be provided, at least at a base level, as a right to ordinary people.
So you're trying to change a conversation, it sounds like. You're trying to reshape how socialism is defined in the United States. Because when you watch Fox, all you hear about is Venezuela.
Yeah, I think it really behooves them to try to scaremonger people, because the core program that someone like Bernie Sanders is fighting for, Medicare for all, a decent job for all, better housing protections, these things are broadly popular. And as individual policy items, they're popular, but obviously they need to find a way to make it scary and make this thing that's kind of common sense scary, because it's common sense to people that when they go to the doctor, they shouldn't get a bill. Just like if, you know, God forbid, there's a fire in your house, you wouldn't expect to get a bill from the local fire company.
And Jacobin, you said 50,000 readers in print, presumably a bigger audience online. And do you see that growing during the Democratic primary?
Yeah, it's been growing. I mean, we reach some months up to 2 million people online, but there's other outlets like Breitbart, Daily Caller. You know, these outlets reach many more people than us, tens of millions
much
of
bigger.
more people.
To be clear, you have a much smaller audience than, you know, well, how would you describe it?
Well, I would say that we are committed to producing our material with a degree of rigor. We want people who are conservatives, who are liberals. We want others to be able to read and